Hey everyone, surprise live for you tonight. A big thing just came down and we wanted to discuss it here at Hidden True Crime. We have a friend of the Hidden True Crime podcast that actually helps us find a lot of information. This person earlier today started sharing some really interesting posts from an online forum. The person is posting in 2011 on a health forum. That would put Brian at about 17 or 18 years old, Bryan Kohberger. The photo being used is Bryan Kohberger. The person discusses living in Pennsylvania. The person mentions their age and it would be how old Bryan Kohberger is. The forum was actually found through using an old email of Bryan Kohberger. That is how the friend of our podcast actually found this forum, is through Bryan Kohberger's old email address that they had. So, with that being said, no law enforcement official has confirmed to us that this is indeed Bryan Kohberger writing in 2011. We'll let you decide that for yourself. But it was compelling enough with all of those facts that we believe that we have landed upon some earlier writings of Bryan Kohberger when he was a teenager. With that being said, how lucky that my co-host is a forensic psychologist. And while he's not feeling too great, he's a little under the weather, we decided to jump on because we felt this was really big news, a really big moment learning the mind of Bryan Kohberger, let's say just over a decade ago, about 12 years ago. So with that being said, Dr. John, you have read everything out there. We have a scroll. I can scroll the video too, and I can pull up some different posts that you want to talk about, whatever you want. I can scroll the video. I think it's much more interesting to read than us, and I can share the post you're referring to. So you just let me know, and I'll let you carry this narrative. How does that sound?
Yeah, I think really there's really one page that's critical. There's another page that's very important. I think if people read the entire thing, they get a sense for the overall argument, or kind of the overall, people can get a feel for what he's discussing and what he's up to, which concerns something he calls visual snow. We'll talk about that a little bit. But also, let me just say that our viewers have a unique opportunity tonight to see us at our most casual, since we're jumping on this at the last minute, and neither of us have really prepared for this in terms of grooming. So don't
Yeah.
expect to see Lauren and I on Project Runway after this.
Kenny said he just woke up to a live chat at 1 a.m. Yes, you did. And so did
Although,
Day by Day. Julie, thank you. And Cherie, they're both telling you to feel better.
thank
Dr.
you.
John. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think this is interesting enough to jump on here and talk about it. But I want to talk about, so the essence of what he's talking about is what he calls visual snow, which is, it's not entirely clear what that is, but it has to do, according to him, it has to do with migraines and toxins. And it's a medical condition that he believes is responsible for many or most of his problems. Now, it's interesting. So he says in one of the posts, he says, I've had visual snow, he calls it DS, since September 21st of 2009. Since then, I have changed mainly from the anxiety and sense of derealization and hopelessness. So it's interesting that right away, if you read that, right away, he's associating visual snow with what I would typically see as emotional or mental health issues. So to me, that's a little bit of a red flag in terms of assessing this situation, meaning that I think this might be someone who tends to what we call somaticize. In other words,
Okay.
they'll take emotional or psychological problems and they'll develop physical symptoms as a result of that. So usually the reason for that is because they're not very psychologically minded. So people that somaticize, they don't want to see themselves as mentally ill. They don't want to acknowledge that there's emotional problems or emotional turmoil. So it's much easier to throw everything into this category of visual snow or migraines or whatever it is. And let me say this, I don't want to discount the fact that this could be real, right?
Yes.
Like I would need to see his medical records, and there's a lot more I'd have to look at. So this could be very real, and maybe this is the cause of his depression. But I think there's a little bit of a red flag when he talks about depersonalization and derealization. Those are both dissociative disorders, which associative disorders are always attributed, or almost always attributed, or caused by trauma. And so never once does he talk about trauma, right? He's talking about depersonalization, but he seems to lack the insight to really see that there's some trauma driving some of this, or potentially there's some trauma driving this, which, as we talked about last night, would be the bullying. So I would start by talking about how a lot of these posts are about visual snow. And notice here, I don't have page numbers here, but people can find these.
Well, tell me, I probably have the two that you're going to emphasize the most, and I can pull them up. Is it the list of his symptoms or the long?
Before we get there, there's a few things I want to talk about to set it up.
Okay.
He says, I don't have the reference here, but he's talking about visual snow, and he says it's caused by toxins in the body, blah, blah, blah. Then he goes on and he says, tell me how every test known to man, in all in caps, tell me how every test known to man cannot show what is wrong with us. We just see stuff. The truth is, there's no test for our toxins. We just need to rid ourselves of them. Visual snow can also be caused by chemical changes. So I think what he's saying there is that he's acknowledging in a way that whatever testing he's had done, it hasn't showed anything. Nothing's shown up. So that, again, that would point in the direction of what we call somatic symptom disorders, or disorders that tend to be physical manifestations of psychological problems. This, by the way, this type of thing, somatization, has a deep history, a long history in psychology going back to Freud. Freud initially treated what he called hysterics, who were doing exactly this. They were exhibiting physical symptoms for what turned out to be psychological and emotional problems. And so this type of thing has a very long history in our field. The term hysteria changed to, now we call it conversion disorder. A conversion disorder is essentially often a neurological condition that has no basis in neurological findings, or in other words, you can have physical symptoms, but after a significant amount of testing, there's no neurological basis for some of those symptoms, right? So that's where it becomes more of a psychological issue. So I don't know for sure if that's what we're talking about here, but it does look to me, this does kind of have the look and feel of that type of thing. It has the look and feel of maybe a conversion disorder or a somatic symptom disorder. So I think what's interesting to me about some of this is someone, even at a very young age, who doesn't really want to look at what might be driving some of his underlying depression and some of his underlying mental health issues. He's calling it visual snow, and then he's putting everything in that category. So, in fact, here's another. I don't have the reference here, but it's in the documents that Lauren is posting.
What does it start with? I might be able to pull it up.
It's April 22nd, 2011.
Nope, don't have that one.
So I just want to read a sentence. It says, everyone I know noticed visual snow when I told them about it. They always had slight little dots, but not nearly as noticeable. So in other words, he's saying once he talks about visual snow, everyone agrees with him and they see it. So that's confirmation bias. This is someone who, again, and this kind of fits my hypothesis here about how this is a type of somatization, that he sees visual snow everywhere. He thinks everyone has it. He thinks it explains all his problems. To me, clearly I would hesitate to say that. It's possible that visual snow could be real for him, but to make the association with mental health and emotional issues, that's a jump. That's a leap. So right? So you could have visual snow, but that doesn't mean you don't. That doesn't necessarily mean you don't also have underlying emotional and psychological problems. But what he's trying to do here is lump them all together.
Okay. Right. That's interesting. Right. As Julie Holden pointed out, visual snow is a very real thing, but it doesn't necessarily cause psychological problems.
Right, exactly, and that's the issue here is that he's making the leap from visual snow and migraine, and also he's not clear about the cause of this, and maybe it's not clear what the cause is, but he's attributing it to migraines and toxins and diet and chemicals and all this other stuff, and it's not out of the question that all of that matters and could be contributing to something, but to go from visual snow to suicidal thoughts to, well, why don't let me, this is a page he had in the chat, so this is May 12th 2011. He says, I always feel as if I'm not there, completely depersonalized. Mentally, I experience fog, lack of comprehension at times. I feel like my life is a movie. That's depersonalization. Depression, no interest in activity, constant thoughts of suicide, crazy thoughts, delusions of grandeur, anxiety, poor self image, poor social skills, no emotion, capitalized. I feel like nothing has a point to it. He says, when I get home, I am mean to my family. This started when visual snow did. I felt no emotion, and along with the depersonalization, I can say and do whatever I want with little remorse. Everyone hates me pretty much. I am an a-hole. So that's interesting. I think I can look at that and say pretty clearly this is someone with some mental health issues, right?
Right.
Whether or not the visual snow is real, this is someone who probably needs some help, and he's young, right? So we're getting a glimpse into the adolescent Bryan Kohberger, and like I said last night, it's actually to me it's sad, because I think if you get him help at this point, if he has a discussion with his parents about what's going on and how he's feeling, which clearly he's not, or he doesn't seem to be having that discussion, then maybe they can get him help, because this is someone who's really distressed. He's experiencing a lot of turmoil. He talks about depersonalization, but he doesn't realize that depersonalization is almost always associated with some type of trauma. We know that he experienced trauma. So again, I think there's a disconnect. He sees the depersonalization as a function of the visual snow.
Thank you. I'm gonna one thing that was written on our Facebook page. For those asking, I apologize that the scroll was making some people sick. We've had a hard time sharing all 100 pages, and I wanted to share as much as I could here during this live. I'll also post the scroll later, as well as a link to the 100 pages that we have of the entire forum. We have some of the most interesting posts on our Facebook page, Hidden True Crime. You can head there to see some of the pages that John is reading. But we had some comments, and I wanted to read a comment from Karen really quickly.
And I want to address Colette's question here too, by the way.
Okay.
Do you want me to get to that first?
Yeah, go ahead. Dr. John Colette asks, do you think it's usual for him to be so aware at this age?
Well, so that's a debate. He's aware that he's experiencing mental health issues, but he's not aware of the underlying reasons. He's attributing all his problems and mental health issues to visual snow. So actually, to me, that makes him unaware. To me, that's actually a lack of insight. That the real insight here would be, I'm having mental health issues. I've been undergoing a lot of bullying at school. I'm in a lot of pain. I need to deal with this. I need to feel these emotions, right? I think whatever else we can say about Bryan Kohberger at 16, 17 years old is he's very, very depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And he's suicidal. And, again, like I said last night, this looks and feels a lot like the profile of a school shooter, or a mass murderer. These are the same types of things you see. Almost all, many school shooters have suicidal ideation, suicidal and homicidal ideation. At that age, there's often a fine line between those two.
Thank you. Uh, Kenna is saying Brian's mom also requested dim lighting on the dinner reservations when Brian was in town, probably due to VS. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Kenna.
Yeah.
And
And
Kenna,
again, I don't want to discount the reality of this. I'm not saying that he's not having that. The issue is that he's throwing everything into that bucket. He's attributing all of his mental health issues to that issue.
well, right. With that being said, before I read Karen's comment on our Facebook page, let me share his list of symptoms here really quickly. Let me pull this up. All right. Here is his list of symptoms that he says is caused by his visual snow. I always feel as if I'm not there.
Those are the ones
Completely
I just read.
okay, depersonalized. But here it is. Let me just fog, lack of comprehension. I feel like my life is a movie, depersonalization, depression, constant thoughts of suicide, crazy thoughts, delusion of grandeur, anxiety, poor self image, poor social skills, no emotion. I feel like nothing has a point to it. When I get home, I am mean to my family. And then, as you said, right, I feel no emotion along with the depersonalization. Everyone hates me pretty much. I am an a-hole. Repeating what John said, but I just think it's really important to share again. And then Karen says this honestly, as someone who has battled severe depression, this is heartbreaking to me. I can relate. I have had moments in my life where I feel these things, only I did not have the energy or words to articulate it so clearly. I am heartbroken for the young man here who was so clearly reaching out. Mental health is a real thing, and I only wish he could have been helped somehow at some point before he got to where and what he did. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great comment. I was actually making that point at the end of last night's live, and I noticed one of the commenters said that I was being way too compassionate towards this guy, that he's clearly a stone cold psychopath who doesn't deserve any sympathy from us. And I don't subscribe to that, because and this is why, because you're seeing an adolescent mind that's in a lot of turmoil that maybe could have been different if there was some type of intervention or help. So I'm not in any way saying that I don't think, what he did was horrendous, and of course I'm not condoning that or endorsing that at all. But I think from a developmental standpoint, you start seeing how he gets there, and this is a glimpse into his mind when he's much younger that really shows us in many ways how someone could get to the point where they do commit quadruple homicide.
Right. Right there. Yeah. Thank you. With that being said, a lot of people are wanting to read these. I might do the scrolling again once we conclude and John can leave. And so once we're done and you finish, I might allow the scroll to go and everyone can see that. I will also post it on our Facebook page. And those that are saying that the Facebook page was hard to read and that they did see that, we have posted some new images that are crisp. We have had a hard time with Facebook compressing, and I will go there after this live and add additional photos as well as the PDF link as soon as I have that up. All right. With that being said, is there anything else, John, you would like?
Yeah, let me go over a few of the. So the page you had up earlier is by far the most important page.
Okay, let me pull that one up again.
If you want a glimpse into Bryan Kohberger's adolescent mind and psyche, this is the page to read. It's from July 4th, 2011. It is a very interesting and compelling statement about his mental health and what he's experiencing and what what some of the issues he's having, the emotional turmoil he's experiencing. So I'm just going to pick out a few of these that I think are interesting and relevant. He says, I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth as I'm starting to view everyone as this. I view everything as I would if I were playing Oblivion. Apparently, that must be a video game, pointless and full of nothing, out of reality. So, obviously, this is someone with a lot of depression. This is someone with severe depression, I think. That seems fairly obvious. Says, I am stuck in this void of nothing, feeling completely no emotion, feeling nothing. I feel dirty, like there's dirt inside my head, my mind. I'm always dizzy and confused. I feel no self-worth. I am intelligent, but I feel the opposite. So this is a little bit of what we discussed last night. The feeling dirty, I think that speaks to possibly, we talked about some of the potential obsessive compulsive qualities that he might have. We're going to start seeing that in this statement, by the way, that he feels somehow dirty and that he can't get it out of his mind. He can't scrub it away. Because of that, he feels no self-worth. Here he says, this is a fascinating comment to me. I am stuck in the depths of my mind where I have to constantly battle my demons.
Wow.
He says later, I hear screams faintly, but I constantly battle away from it. So he's having demons and screaming. And I think that speaks to, and he uses the word constantly. So I think that speaks to some of the obsessive elements we talked about in his crime. You're starting to see them here as young as 17. The demons and the screaming, those are, I would associate those with the violence and the aggression that we've talked about. You know, he talks about being mean to his father. He talks about being mean to his family. So I think you're starting to see some of that come out at this age. That the demons, some people might interpret the demons as maybe psychosis or schizophrenia, but I don't really see that here. I
A
think,
lot of people are asking that in chat, including
yeah.
a mental health professional. They want your opinion about
I mean,
schizoaffective.
ultimately, ultimately it's too early. I think in order to really diagnose him, I'd have to sit down. I'd have to do a lot of testing before I could even begin to assess that. But I think the screaming is, he's actually he's not talking about him screaming. He's talking about other people screaming. That's what makes it fascinating. He's not referring to him screaming. So I see that as his aggressive impulses. This is someone who's, the screaming is more about other people. I don't know if he's, this is a public forum, so I don't think he's going to give you the full story here, but he's definitely holding back. But the fact that he's talking in a public forum about hearing demons, constantly batting demons, and being stuck in his mind, having these obsessive thoughts about screaming, I mean, it's troubling. It's interesting. I feel a lot of empathy for him. This is someone who's in a lot of turmoil, and he just doesn't know what to do with it. My hypothesis has been that he pursues criminal justice because he's trying to figure out a way to channel these negative impulses in a positive manner. That's, we talked about that last night. He says a little bit later on, he says, he's worried that he might spiral out of control and lose myself in the void. So this notion of control is also closely aligned with obsessive compulsive qualities. Obsessive compulsive disorder is largely about trying to maintain control and trying to develop rituals and practices that allow one to master the world or stay in control of their lives. So it's interesting that he talks about control there. He says, I look in the mirror and I see this sickly, remember, he's 17 years old when he's saying this, by the way. I look in the mirror and I see the sickly, tired, useless, and stupid man in the mirror. He is a complete disgrace. He doesn't even deserve to live. So we're seeing some suicidal ideation there, obviously. He goes on, he says, I felt like a criminal, or I felt eerie and alone. I died during those nights. I felt like a criminal, but where was my record? I felt like a criminal. He's 17 years old. That tells me, again, that kind of suggests, it kind of alludes to some of the things we were talking about last night, that he's trying to fight these impulses. Like, there's clearly, he recognizes he's not a criminal, but he feels like one. He feels like he's doing something wrong. He feels like these impulses are somehow negative and out of his control. And I mean, I don't know, most criminals don't feel like criminals until they've committed crimes, but that's not what he's saying here.
Right.
So it's really the screaming into criminality is really fascinating. Again, my hypothesis has been that because he feels like a criminal and because he's having these aggressive impulses that he really is struggling to control, that he goes into criminal justice to try to remedy that.
A lot of people are mentioning or mentioning and asking, is this around the time drugs started or when he was on the drugs, or did the heroin perhaps, calm some of his pain? So,
Yeah, I think I don't know. We don't know for sure when he started the heroin. One of his friends indicated that it began in high school, but we don't know exactly when. So I think actually it's highly probable he's using heroin at this point. Clearly, he's not talking about that on these forums. I think he'd probably lose a lot of people if he started talking about his drug addictions. So he's trying to
right.
create a very specific narrative here, which is the visual snow is leading to all these problems. He's feeling like a criminal. He's hearing screams. He's got these demons. He doesn't know what to do with that. And he thinks that if he can get rid of the visual snow, that somehow he can remedy all these problems.
Yeah. Wow. Uh,
Let me just continue for a second. He
please.
goes on to reiterate the screaming. He says, and as if the ringing in my ears and the fuzz of my vision is simply all of the demons in my head mocking me. Again, he's attributing the demons to visual snow and not to something else like aggressive impulses. He says, I fall asleep, but I wake up quickly to bloody screams. So the
Wow.
screaming and the criminal, like all of this is not normal stuff. I mean,
No.
I recognize that a lot of adolescents, including myself, love to read Nietzsche and talk about how horrible things are, but that's just kind of normal adolescent musings. Uh, maybe, maybe that's somewhat normal, but adolescent angst. This is not adolescent angst. This goes way beyond that. This is someone suffering from screams in his sleep, and presumably when he's awake. And the screams aren't coming from him; they're coming from other people. So I don't know if he's having fantasies about harming people at this age. It's possible.
Wow. Um, did you read the whole thing?
Just
Or
let me
do you
finish with
want to
one
read?
last line I'd point out. He says, nothing I do is enjoyable. I am blank. I have no opinion. I have no emotion. I have nothing. That's,
I have nothing. And that's how he
that's
ended it, right? Let's see.
yeah, that's the last line. And he says, can you relate? So he's looking for people on the forums to connect to that.
There it is, that last one. I have no opinion. I have no emotion. I have nothing. Can you relate? Again, this is on our Facebook page, facebook.com/hidden true crime. I'll have it soon on our other forums as well. Anything else you want to say?
I think those are the main points I want to make. I guess somebody could argue that maybe there's a bit of schizophrenia seeping in here. There's clearly depression. Maybe there's some elements of psychopathy here. There's not a lot of empathy. There he talks about lacking remorse with how he's treating his parents and his family. Uh, you know, this picture still needs to be developed. Uh, I do think, though, one interesting thing I think I learned from this is that this is someone I talked about it last night. When he was confronted by the bar owner about harassing women in the bar, he was stunned. He said, I don't know what you're talking about, right? This is someone who is not really psychologically minded. He's not really showing a lot of insight or self-awareness. He's attributing all his problems to a physical cause. And that lack, Psychologists sometimes call that mentalization, or we have different terms for it, metacognition. It's the ability to stand back and reflect on your life. It's the ability you build some self-reflection into your behavior so that you just don't act on impulse all the time. And I think that lack of mentalization it comes back to haunt him much later. But you're starting to see it here. Like this, I think this is a critical moment in his life when he might be able to arrest that. We know that this is a bright, according to his professors and according to people who know him, this is a very intelligent person. But he doesn't have emotional intelligence and he doesn't have social intelligence, and so he can't assess his mental health problems because it's too painful for him, I think, and it's a little too complex. So I think it's unfortunate that somebody couldn't take his hand and lead him in the right direction.
Yeah. Lita, thank you so much for your super chat and question about the blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy he once was. We will read that right now. And then also thank you, Ecooter, is that French? Thank you for your integrity and empathy in delivering this case. Depression, mental illness is traumatizing and devastating in unimaginable ways. Maybe learn something so others are helped. Emily, thank you. Let me read that part about the blue-eyed boy. Is that okay, John?
Yeah, that's in this part, right? It's in the one you have up.
I might reread a couple of the things you said, but I'll get to it. He says, I barely remember my childhood. I often fear being 80 years old alone and having faint memories of my parents, everything I missed out on. I think about my father, what a good man he is, how I treat him like dirt because I have this condition and I can't take it. I might spiral out of control and lose myself in the void, and I can't let it all go. All of these regrets I predict for my future self, all of these thoughts of remorse. I got this when I was in my stage of discovery. Now I look in the mirror and I see this sickly, tired, useless, and stupid man in the mirror. He is a complete disgrace. He doesn't even deserve to live. I remember when I was 15, I would wander alone at 2 a.m. Everything was so generic. Nowhere felt like home. I saw things that were not there, a different reality. I felt eerie and alone. I died during those nights. I felt like a criminal, but where is my record? I can't talk without flinching now. I used to be this healthy, blonde-haired boy with blue eyes, and in a few years, I have darker hair and darker eyes, half the body weight. Where did I leave off? I try to sleep, I try to clear my head, but the pressure won't go away, the pain and depression won't leave. So I know I reread some of the things you read, but to correlate the blue-eyed boy, I reread.
Yeah, that is a little bizarre. That was a bizarre moment to me. That's the type of statement that might suggest some psychosis, or at least maybe the beginnings of psychosis. Clearly you don't go from a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid to a dark-haired, brown-eyed kid in a year or two. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how he gets there. That's a little peculiar. That again, that might start touching on something that's a little deeper, like maybe schizophrenia. But again, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to get there unless I spent time with them. It's certainly possible that he might have some elements of schizophrenia. He might have some elements of psychosis. So I don't think we're going to know. We're probably not going to know until somebody gets in there and spends significant time with them and does a lot of testing.
Right. Thank you. Many people are asking how you would treat him, but I think let me guess your answer since I live with you. You would have to get in there. You don't even know. You'd have to give him the test. You'd have to interview him for several hours. You'd have to do all of this testing, spend days with him to even understand a type of treatment process.
You mean what? How would it? So there's a difference between diagnosing and
Treating someone.
developing what we call a case formulation, which a case formulation would help me to figure out motivations and that kind of stuff. So, but right. So that would be a different phase than treatment. Yeah, treatment would come after the case formulation.
Right.
How would I treat this? I think clearly if somebody was treating him back then, I think clearly they'd have to focus on the depression first and foremost. Also, there's various types of depression which are so severe and so deep that they create some psychoses and hallucinations. And so the blue-eyed to brown-eyed situation, maybe this is that type of depression. I'm not sure. It's clear though that this is a deep depression here.
Right. For those once again asking where we got this post and how we know it's him, we'll just share with you the facts, and all of you can decide whether or not it's Bryan, because we have not had law enforcement or official person say this is him. But once again, a friend of the program, Hidden, a true crime podcast, Hidden True Crime, who often helps us find really fascinating bits of information, discovered this earlier this morning through a verified email address of Bryan Kohlberger. It was an older email address of his. The photo being used from 2011 is a photo of Bryan from that age, and these posts were from 2011. It's about visual snow. It's a health forum, people discussing what visual snow is and how it affects them. And again, you can watch the replay, but for those just joining us, I hope that helps. All of you can decide whether or not it is Bryan from those facts. We felt it was compelling enough that we're going live with it. So,
and I do see this as a bit of a cry for help in the sense that, I don't know, maybe he's hoping some of his classmates see this or somebody. I do think there's a little bit of that here. I mean, he's looking for solutions through solving the visual snow problem, but I think it goes above and beyond that. And keep in mind, this is a public forum, so you're getting a small glimpse of what's really going on with him. He's not going to give you the deeper, darker stuff in a public forum. If he's having homicidal thoughts or fantasies or impulses, he's not going to share that publicly. So, but he's certainly touching on it with the screaming and the demons, and there's enough there that I think you could, knowing what we know now, I think you can start seeing some of those impulses, some of those violent impulses showing up even back here.
well, thank you for sharing your thoughts tonight. Thank you, Colette Cox. She says, here is Hidden True Crime's link to the full 100 pages of Bryan's post. That must have just happened because thank you, Colette. I think our moderators are working around the clock, just so you guys know. We have some incredible people that support Hidden True Crime, and they must have gotten that link to work while doing this live. So forgive the scroll earlier. We'll leave that off the end of this live, and you can head to that link that we'll also put it in the description of this video for everyone to see those 100 pages, to see the entire forum and find your own little nuggets in there. And if you have any more questions about it, you can let us know. Does this, I'm getting a lot of questions. Does this change so far what you think about him, Dr. John?
No, not really. I mean, if anything, I think it provides support for the hypothesis I've been developing. I mean, I didn't foresee the somatization issues or the somatic symptom stuff, but it's consistent with someone who's who's not really willing to look at himself very much, and it's consistent with someone who's not particularly self-reflective. So it's not surprising to see this. I think this is pretty consistent with the psychological profile we've been developing and some of my hypotheses. But again, I think if this is a cry for help, the sad part is that why didn't he get help? Did he not mention these issues to his parents? I think some of his friends clearly saw it. I don't know. That's always the question. How do you prevent mass murders? How do you prevent school shootings? And as I said the other night, this looks a lot like the profile of a school shooter. We know obviously he's not grabbing a gun and going and shooting up a school, but this is what it looks like. The suicidal thoughts, the demons. That this is very similar to what we'd expect from that type of profile.
Yeah. And I want to clarify, we do not know whether or not his parents got him help or what his mental health. He could they could have worked to get him help. They could have done everything that one is supposed to do. So that we're not sure of either.
Right. Right. That could be a faulty assumption. I'm making the assumption that he didn't get help because of the outcome that we now know, 11 years later.
Yeah.
But maybe he did, and
Right.
maybe he got help and it wasn't sufficient. I don't know.
Yeah. Heaven 57, it's hard to feel empathy toward BK since he allegedly unalived 4 innocent kids, but I know mental illness is real. A couple of things I want to say to that too is exactly, I can feel sorry or have empathy for the 16-year-old Bryan Kohberger that we're reading about today, the child that is Bryan Kohberger, but that doesn't mean that I have to have any empathy for him today. I don't right now. I'm angry at him. In addition to that, the reason that we do talk about this and try to understand the mind of the criminal is not so that we can all have, loads of love and empathy for him. It's so that we can stop this from happening again and again. That this is, as you point out, school shooters and the profile of them. We need to understand what is going on. That's my little soapbox, not my husband's, but those are the two things I want to say to that.
Well, and with school shooters, to emphasize that point, with school shooters, a lot of times people say, of course there were signs. Of course there were red flags. We just ignored them. So at what point do you take some of those red flags seriously? Oftentimes there are red flags, and as a society, I'm not sure how we handle that, but we need to do better, I think.
Yes, we need to do better. Thank you. All right, we have 4,270 something people watching, over 4,000. That's not common for us. With that being said, it would mean a lot to us if you would give our video a like and subscribe. And again, if our moderators want to share that link one more time where the 100 pages of docs are, we'll put that up one more time. And I'll also, at the end of this live, put that in the description of this video. Or maybe I can do it even while I'm live. I'll have to learn that. Things to learn. John, you need some sleep tonight. You need some rest. He had a 101 fever before we jumped on. Is there anything else one more time that you would like to say?
I think my fever's gone down maybe a little bit since I've been on, so that's a plus. But obviously, I'm still congested. But yeah, I started getting a little sick after our live last night. But this is really important, and we wanted to share it. And Lauren was adamant about coming on here, and so here I am. But anything I want to say? Are there any other just maybe a few questions? If you have any really good questions that we might be able to answer.
Yeah, let's see. There were some really good questions. Now that we're asking for questions, they've all scrolled. Speaking of scrolling and everyone who hated my scrolling.
I noticed several people have mentioned the importance of mental health, and obviously I'm a psychologist. I totally agree.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is something to point out. Thank you, Holly, for reminding me. New sub here. This is true. John and I are covering multiple cases in Idaho right now for those new to our channel. And Idaho does not have the insanity plea. So a lot of people are saying, oh, this is going to help him plead. They don't have there is no insanity plea in Idaho. You have to be competent to stand trial. But in Idaho, that doesn't work.
And I don't think you're going to. I don't think you're going to get to. I don't think you'd get to insanity with this situation, even with this information and testing. I don't think you'd get there because he was stalking them. He showed up 12 times around their house. He was clearly thinking about this crime for a while, so it was very premeditated. Unless he's floridly psychotic or there's some type of schizophrenia we don't know about, and maybe there is. I don't know, but he does seem to be somewhat oriented in court. So I think it's going to be hard for him to get to the insanity plea.
Okay. Thank you. I did have a couple of questions. Yeah, when red flags show up, not everyone does know how to handle them. It would be nice to understand more on how to help people. And then there are some people that try to get help and can't because of a certain state they live in or their insurance. Right.
Right,
Um,
that's true. Yeah, it's not. That's a good point. It's not always simple. It's also not simple if you, let's say the school tries to intervene, maybe the school guidance counselor sees some red flags and tries to intervene. That's not to say that this person wants help. Someone who doesn't have a lot of self-awareness is probably going to reject help anyway. So if you perceive all of your problems as stemming from something physical like visual snow, then you're probably not going to do well with mental health anyway. I mean, unfortunately, right? There's the cliche about wanting to change before you can change, and that's very true. There has to be some belief or desire to change or to seek help I think, for help to be effective. So even if someone does try to intervene here, it may not be effective.
Fox Nanny, thank you so much for your contribution. Great question, too. You say he's not self-aware, Dr. John, but isn't what he wrote self-awareness? I think that's a great question because I would agree with that it did feel self-aware.
I think in general the answer is no, because he's arguing that all these problems are related to one physical ailment. So and he's talking about depersonalization. I mean, he has some insight into some of his symptoms, but he doesn't have any insight into what's driving those symptoms. He doesn't have any insight into what's causing the depression. He doesn't have any insight into what's causing the depersonalization. Depersonalization is usually a result of trauma. This is someone who's been bullied mercilessly throughout school, but he doesn't ever talk about that. So I think that's what I'm talking about. So it's the emotional wounds that really affect change. It's the emotional wounds, I think, that need to be dealt with. And he's acknowledging the symptoms and the aftermath of what happens with trauma, but he's not looking at it at the level he should be. And so while it may seem self-aware, I think the reality is that it lacks self-awareness in the sense that he's not getting to the underlying causes. He's getting to kind of red herrings, which are this visual snow issue. And again, I'm not saying he doesn't have that. The question is whether that's the cause of all his mental health issues.
Lil Nicky, do we know what type of trauma he experienced and at what age? Thank you for jumping on and sharing this info so quickly. Feel better, Dr. John.
Thank
We
you.
don't know all of his trauma. No, there's a lot of
No.
things about Bryan Kohberger we do not know. So
the only thing we know definitively is that there was a significant amount of bullying that continued through high school until he lost a lot of weight, which appears to be around this time. The bullying seems to have been severe. We don't know much about his family culture. So I don't know. It looks to me like it's a family culture that wasn't really putting a lot of emphasis on emotions. And families that process emotions openly and transparently tend to be a little healthier. So this family seems a little bit shut down.
Kimberly, thank you so much for your support as well as your comment here. I have visual snow, she says, and no psychological issues he mentioned. They do not go hand in hand. It's not that deep.
Okay, so that's right. So Kimberly's making my point. Thank you. That visual snow does not correlate directly with mental health issues.
Okay. Tracy Reeves is asking where we can read this. I don't know if there's a way to share the link one more time to our moderators if they hear me throw that up, and it'll also be on our Facebook page, or is already facebook.com/hidden true crime. I'll also have it. I'll share it everywhere. You guys, whether you're on Twitter or TikTok or I don't think we're on Reddit, are we? TikTok
No.
or We're everywhere else. We will share it. YouTube community page. We will share it. It might be right after this ends because it'll, I'll be posting those. Instagram. There were a couple of questions. Thank you to those who write question in caps. That helps me. Yeah, we want to know more about his family too. People are wanting to know, and so do we. And I'm sure we'll learn more soon.
I noticed a comment that someone likes my hat. Thank you. Yeah, this is what happens when you're sick all day and you haven't done really any grooming and you jump on a live. You throw on a cap. So I appreciate that. Yeah, this was given to me for Christmas. So at least I had the sense to put on a new cap.
Oh, is that the one you got for Christmas?
Yeah.
Yes.
But again, I'm not gonna jump on any fashion shows after this. So
yeah, people want us to explain what visual snow is, and I don't think that's our. I googled it. That's about what I know. I googled it after I found this forum and read about it, but we're definitely not experts in visual snow. But it's essentially for those that are maybe on chat, they can explain it. Those that experience it, but it has something to do with that upsets your vision that you should see. I don't even want to try to pretend I know, but it sounds horrible. It sounds not fun.
somebody asked a question about his lack of remorse. He talks about his lack of remorse here as a lack of remorse towards his family. So it appears that he was treating his family somewhat aggressively and poorly, and he doesn't feel any remorse for doing so. We also know that there were some classmates at the time that he was being overly aggressive with. So my guess is it probably applies to that as well.
Cheryl Johnson again. You mentioned this too, actually, John, before we jumped on this live, that there are studies. She said Cambridge University did a study saying that visual snow is often linked to schizophrenia, and you mentioned that before we went live, and that's what you suspected people might think that, but you are not feeling that tonight, and we discussed that.
Well, again, I don't want to rule it out. Until I do full testing with someone, I'm going to do an MMPI and a PAI and a Rorschach, whatever. I'll give a full battery of tests, and it's going to give me a much better picture. So, and obviously, sitting in front of someone and talking to them for hours on end, it makes it difficult for them to mask serious mental health issues, especially schizophrenia. So, there definitely seem to be some markers or some elements of schizophrenia here, but to go to a full diagnosis at this point, I don't know. I think if that was the case, that you probably would see more of his classmates talking about it, how he had bizarre thoughts at times, or he was disconnected from the environment. We know he was a bit of a loner and he was withdrawn quite a bit, but that's not the same thing as schizophrenia. So could there be schizophrenia here? Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, but based on what we know, this is someone who seems to be reasonably oriented to his environment, and he seems like he functioned fairly highly in graduate school. None of his classmates seem to indicate that he had bizarre thoughts or bizarre mentation at all. So I don't know, but it's a good point. The visual snow, assuming that that's accurate, could be connected to some elements of that.
Virginia in LA made a comment that I think is worth noting. He obviously does feel remorse because he said he felt bad about it. That was an interesting moment for me too. He said he is mean to his dad and he knows he's an a-hole.
But then he says, I can say and do whatever I want with little remorse. So it's a conflict.
So it's a conflict.
Right. He's got turmoil over it. He's struggling with those issues around remorse. He does and doesn't have it. The question is whether his moral sense becomes more acute or stronger over time or less. I don't know.
Yes. We will work to get closed captions turned on. They're computer generated and they are difficult during lives when there are questions. they actually, I did look into it per request, and we will work on that, and I'll make sure they're on after this live for the replay. But there is a lag when you choose them for a live, which means it's difficult for questions. No excuse. We definitely have many family members who use them. So, and John himself struggles with hearing. So we will work on that and see if we can figure it out. V, thank you for your donation and your support. Um, I mean, yeah. How about this?
Right. Is he diagnosable as a narcissist? Again, too early. I mean, I could speculate. He clearly
Has narcissistic traits,
has some narcissistic qualities for sure. Obviously, I mean
obviously.
most murderers who do this type of thing have some degree of narcissism.
Yeah. People are asking if we have watched his sister's the movie that his sister starred in, the horror movie. No, we have not watched it yet, but we have read about it. We have seen this particular scene where she acts in it.
Yeah, I usually don't make it a practice to watch movies that have Rotten Tomato ratings of less than 10, but I think we can make an exception in this case. So, in fact, I don't even know if it has a Rotten Tomato
Hey,
rating.
if you've read all of Chad Daybell's books, we
Oh
can
my
watch
gosh.
this movie.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know why Daybell wasn't up for a Pulitzer, but maybe they'll correct themselves.
For those new to our channel, we cover the Chad Daybell case in detail, and Dr. John was actually in the Netflix documentary "Sins of Our Mother" about that Daybell case. So, for those wondering, that was what our first podcast was about, and we're continuing to see that case through the trial scheduled for this spring.
Thank
Uh,
you. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, a lot of trial questions for us. I'm going to be honest, we're not attorneys, although we have like 10 in our immediate family, both our fathers, my brother, my sister. We are a journalist and a psychologist. So, people asking if you think he'll testify, people asking how long do you think it'll take for the trial? I don't know with those.
Depends on the nature of the evidence. And of course, they're going to still build a stronger case. They have the shoe print. They're going to try to match that to some of his shoes, I'm sure. Remember, they thought that he was wearing Vans. So when they go into his apartment, I'm sure they're going to try to find those shoes. There's little elements like that that they still need to investigate and to make their case much stronger. So I think when they start putting those pieces together, it'll be interesting to see what he does.
Right.
If he gets
Well,
to the point where the evidence is so overwhelming and compelling, I wonder if he'll confess. But I don't see that, by the way. But it's something to think about.
yeah. Lori Shipley Barker says he is loving the spotlight right now. This is what he loves, being the center of attention.
Yeah, true. Yeah, he does. He's relishing this moment. He, like most mass murderers or serial killers, he couldn't avoid getting on different forums and speaking out. And at school, he was always clear. He was always the one to tell you that he was the smartest one in the room, and he made sure you knew it. So this is someone who definitely likes to be recognized for his intelligence, and this is someone who likes attention and probably can't get enough of it. So true.
Nikki is asking, could these online health forum posts be introduced into evidence during trial or maybe sentencing? That's if forensics connect him to the email address. Right. If forensics connect him and confirm that this is actually Bryan Kohberger 11 years ago, I would say yes.
Well, I think you'd have to ask the question: would this help the defense or the prosecution more, though?
Right.
So I think, from the prosecution standpoint, the demons and the screaming and those types of things would help their case. But from the defense standpoint, they're going to try to paint this person as someone with serious mental health issues that simply needed help and didn't get it, and they might use that to seek a lesser charge. I don't think that's going to work, by the way, but I could see it benefiting either side.
Frida, thank you for your support. Does a PhD in crime or his working on a PhD in crime relate to this? Yes, it does. And Frida, if you're new to our show, we did a whole podcast on that. But
Well, last night we did a live where we talked about that.
but
So
over
my take on that, Frida, is that he gets into criminal justice to try to manage some of his aggressive and violent impulses. In other words, there's something we call sublimation, which is you take a negative impulse and you transform it into something positive. So let's say, for example, someone feels a lot of aggression and anger and rage. An artist may take that impulse and create art. And so they're doing something positive with those negative impulses. I think he's doing something similar with his attempt to get into law enforcement. I think he's studying the criminal mind so that he's normalizing it, and maybe in his mind's eye it's helping him manage some of his aggressive impulses. So I think it's his attempt to really try to arrest some of his obsessive thoughts around violence, probably.
okay. Inquisitive mind. And this is a question of an inquisitive mind. Great question. Did he commit these murders just to feel something, since he had apparently felt nothing for a very long time?
I think so. There's a true crime podcast that we're pretty convinced that Bryan Kohlberger called to talk about the crimes.
Yes, and we want to do a separate video on that. But yeah, go ahead and talk
Yeah,
about that.
we'll do something on that. But essentially, it's fascinating because essentially he says two things. He says one,
The
so
caller that we believe is Brian, but we'll call it the caller into the podcast. Yeah.
yeah, so the caller into the podcast, we don't know for sure it's Bryan Kohlberger, but it certainly seems like him, and people that know him have said it sounds just like him. So, but do we have phone records to verify that he called the podcast at that time? No, we don't. But it's a very important call because he says a couple. First of all, he says that he's heard from Sigma Chi's, which is a male fraternity on campus. He's heard from them, and they've talked about many times. He says 10 Sigma Chi's have talked about how they can commit murder and get away with it. But the interesting thing about that is, and the host of the podcast, by the way, rightly questions him, is like, what? These guys were talking to you about this and you haven't called law enforcement? So, and it seems to stump Kohlberger. He's like, no, I haven't. But I think you have to assume that he didn't talk to the Sigma Chi's. This is him showing us what he's thinking. And what he's thinking is, can I commit murder and get away with it? Can I commit the perfect murder and get away with it? So that's one of his thoughts. The other thing he says, when the host kind of asks him, why would you do that? Or what does that mean? He says he believed the Sigma Chi's they wanted to prove themselves. They wanted to show people how smart they were. And that's why they would do it. So he's kind of telling us his motive.
To those asking about this profile, we have a mod for that podcast. And why don't you share the podcast name that we believe he called into? And for those wondering, and some people saying it's been debunked, it has not been debunked. It hasn't been confirmed either. But I've listened to voice comparisons myself, and it sounds like him. He did speak in court, and we compared the voices. And then Casey Arntz, someone that knows him from high school and has been interviewed by the media a lot, does believe it is him. We don't know again, but we're not just throwing this out as some random thing. We've definitely been looking into this podcast. So feel free to share that podcast name too.
So to answer the question is he doing this to feel something? I think the reason I'm alluding to that podcast is because he essentially says in that podcast that the reason he's doing it is to prove how smart he is. And if let's say that's the motive, or at least that's his motive. It may not be the deeper motive. I think the deeper motive is something else. But if his motive is to show how smart he is and to prove himself, then he's not doing it to experience the thrill or the feeling of killing people. He's doing it because this is like an intellectual exercise to him. This is like an experiment. So we know that he's studied the criminal mind. he has this survey he's developed with these questions that kind of follow his steps in committing these murders, except for the stalking part, by the way. He left that out. But I think to him, this is like an experiment. It's like an intellectual experiment to show how smart he is and to prove that he can get away with murder. And I think he says that on that podcast. And so I don't know. I think law enforcement should definitely verify that that's him, because I think that definitely can be used at trial.
Yeah. Some people are saying that it's been proven it wasn't him. I'm still not sure. I mean, the voices sound like him, so I'll wait for law enforcement on that one. We'll find out. We'll find out. The TREV 757 podcast. Thank you. Let's see. There was one other question I wanted to bring out.
So some people are saying it's not debunked. It is debunked.
It looks like nobody knows still. That's what I'm reading. I've read a bunch of the comments, and in the end,
if it turns out to be accurate, it's a really incredible moment, by the way, because it's him. He has the audacity to get on a podcast and essentially lie about what's going on and to let us into his mind, to show us what he's thinking about these murders. And what he's thinking about these murders is that he's smarter than everyone and he's going to get away with it.
Right. Stephanie B., thank you so much for reminding people. Please join us on Patreon for more discussions with Lauren and Dr. John. We did an episode today for Patreon, and we do those. We're going to start doing those every Friday night. We go live. It's been about 5:30 these nights, 5:30 Pacific. We go live on Friday nights, and we're working on doing after shows for our Patreon members. So thanks for sharing that. Thank you. Also,
there'll be no after show tonight, though, because
no.
I need to get some sleep.
Hopefully
I can overcome this cold or whatever it is, flu, by next week. So
right. People asking help. Let's see. There was one other question I wanted to share. I cannot find it. Colette Cox asked, wouldn't this be similar to BTK or Zodiac reaching out to the media?
Similar, but not at that level. BTK and Zodiac were obsessed with, and it was their crimes were committed at a different time, by the way. So like with Zodiac, they literally he would send stuff in the mail. He would send stuff snail mail. So I think the game was easier. It was easier to play that game before the digital age. So, but yeah, I think there are some similarities. I think he couldn't help himself because he thought he was so smart. He just couldn't. It's always a classic mistake that many of these types of murderers make. But he couldn't just stay quiet. He needed to make a statement. So yes, I think there are similarities. Probably not at the level of Zodiac or BTK, but similarities, yes.
Thank you. And thanks for those who have been sharing what visual snow is in the comments. And thank you for our wonderful moderators tonight. We're not the only ones up late tonight. Our moderators are later than we are right now, and they're here with us. Thank you.
Thank you for the definition here too, by the way, with off-grid with rock bottom wild things. That's the best definition we've seen tonight. Do you want to read that?
Yeah, visual snow is a form of visual hallucination that is characterized by the perception of small, bilateral, simultaneous, diffused mobile dots, usually throughout the entire field. It sounds miserable. So that is what he was dealing with, or what this forum was about, was that. But as other people have pointed out, that doesn't necessarily mean all those other psychological issues he was dealing with. So, right.
Right.
All
And
right.
maybe if it's severe enough, there might be some correlation with mental health issues. But to go from visual snow to suicidal ideation or some of the things he's talking about, it seems like a little bit of a stretch, I think.
Right. Faye, thank you so much. You, Lauren, and Dr. John can look any way you want. I appreciate both of you so much. Also a therapist here, but I love learning the forensic ins and outs. Well, thank you, Faye, for what you do as a therapist. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, Loretta Lee, from Western Australia. Love your show. So informative. Thank you so much for being here. All right. I think I've said this to you multiple times, but any final last words, Dr. Babe, before bed? Thank you for being here tonight.
I think just I'd reiterate a point I made last night, which is that this is a glimpse inside an adolescent's mind that's very troubled. And from a developmental standpoint, I think you can see how someone like this could go from where he was in 2011 to where he landed in 2022 with these murders. So it's sad. It's a sad story. And I obviously have zero empathy for what he did, but I do have a lot of empathy for the pain he was going through back then. And, again, it's unfortunate that somebody couldn't have helped him with some of those issues.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here late with us tonight, and also those overseas, those that it's nice and bright where you are and during the day. Those in Australia. So thank you. All right. Until next time, we have more information. We're still going through everything too, but we wanted to get on and share our basic thoughts. Gray Hughes investigates. Thank you so much for being here. Keep on trucking. Have you seen the possibility of a Bundy connection with Chi Omega and going from Pennsylvania to Washington and then Colorado through Utah? We have heard a lot of the Bundy similarities, especially the Sigma Chi or Chi Omega homes. Any last thoughts on that, John? I think we're watching with everyone else to see what
this
covers.
is developing so quickly. We're just trying to keep our eyes open for everything new and try to make sense of it. And I think the connections to BTK are also really interesting. And I think it'll be fascinating to see if his former professor put him in touch with BTK, if he had conversations with him in prison. That would be really amazing. That would be a really fascinating thing to look at.
Yeah, it is. Thank you for bringing that up, Gray, and thank you for your support. Thank you so much, everyone. Leave the rest of your questions in comments. John and I do read the comments, and we pick out questions we love and we answer them on air. So if it wasn't answered tonight during this late last minute live, we will take a look at your questions, especially about what we just uncovered, and bring you more. So thank you so much. Thank you, Julie, for being here. Get some rest. Agree. Good night, everyone.
All right. Good night. Thanks, guys.
Good night.